Let me begin by saying that it's really delightful to be in conversation with all of you. And I wanted to begin by asking the question, if you can describe the significance of A Raisin in the Sun, both with respect to American theater and more specifically to the history of African American theater, and also include some of your own relationship to this groundbreaking play.
For me, Lloyd Richards was my first acting teacher. I admit that at that time, I had heard about this play, Raisin in the Sun, but I hadn't seen it, and I knew very little about it. And the movie, I believe, had come out, and I didn't see it. That was many, many years ago. I didn't know that Lloyd had anything to do with it because I just didn't put anything together at that time like that. Years later, I was invited to play Benitha at Hartford Stage, and I was, excited. Bill J was my Walter Lee. Bill, I think we all know Bill J. He's pretty fabulous. And a woman named Claudia McNeil was Mama. And I have to admit that I knew who she was, but I did not have any idea of the significance of me doing Benny with the original Mama, with Lena. I think that's what kept me from being so unafraid to try to work on this piece, on this character, because I just didn't know how large the whole thing was in a way. And it was her first time doing Raisin since the Broadway show. So she felt very empowered. So I guess for me, it was a stunning moment, and I had to reflect on it in a lot of ways, some of which are not actually on stage. There were backstage issues that were probably of my doing because I just didn't know how big it was, how large this event was for me. And I am so grateful to have that lesson, especially at that time and with that woman. She was pretty fabulous.
Kenny, you directed the 2014 revival of A Raisin in the Sun and the film. Can you talk about the significance of the play in the context of that moment for you professionally?
Well, yeah, if I talk about the significance of Lorraine Hansberry and that particular play, I don't think we have enough time to discuss how powerful and impactful it was. I had the opportunity of directing my first Broadway show in 2004. The production of A Raisin in the Sun. And then I was honored to have directed another television version of that Broadway show. And then 10 years later, A Raisin in the Sun afforded me the Tony Award 10 years later. So A Raisin in the Sun is important to me personally. In fact, as I was getting ready to do the Broadway show the first time in 2004, I was working at a regional theater, Cincinnati Playhouse, and I was offered the job to direct it on Broadway because the estate, the Lorraine Hansberry estate, demanded that a Black director helm the show. So they had to find a Black director, and I was already committed to doing production of a play called Blue in Cincinnati. And the artistic director said, Kenny, you have to, Ed Stern said, you have to direct this Broadway show. If you can find another director that can come on during Tech Week to finish out the production here, we will release you to go to Broadway to do it because we are so proud of you. We want that to happen. And that person that I contacted was Seret Scott. And Seret Scott graciously came in and took over the production of Blue. So I am forever grateful to this Seret Scott for affording me a Broadway directing career. But more specifically, when I think about that play, I think it's one of those plays that there are roles for a variety of actors. You know, it's young Benitha, then it's Mama, then it's Ruth. So generationally, there's opportunities for actors to come and tell that story. And it was a story that I think that eventually white folks didn't feel it was so political that they could allow this to happen on their stages. But I don't think they realized the intellect and the sophistication of Lorraine Hansberry, because subtly she told a political story, a family story, an American story, a Black story, a world story. And I think that's the power of it. And I think she opened the doors for all of the writers to come, and for many of us directors to give us opportunity to work, in the same sense that August Wilson gave an opportunity for a whole generation of actors to just get jobs and get paid. So Lorraine opened doors, but she gave Black folks job opportunity, and she inspired us to go on and write other material and direct other material. And so she's the gatekeeper, and I'm so grateful for her contribution to America.
Robert, same question. Can you talk about for the significance of Lorraine Hansberry for you in particular, but also in the history of American theater?
My first experience with Lorraine, I think, as all of us probably, was reading the play. Me in particular, as a writer and a director, I was just struck by her brilliance as a writer, just how I fully dove into the story and recognized myself and my family in the writing in a way that I did not recognize myself in other plays. And then more recently, of course, as we began to investigate her queerness as an artist, is hugely significant to me as someone who was writing and was told that, you know, my queerness was otherness, right? And that I was either had to write about Black people or gay people, but writing about Black people and gay people was not something that people wanted to sort of encourage. And so Lorraine being at the forefront, writing about who she was and who we were as a people was fantastic, but also giving voice to women. I remember when I directed Raisin, there's that scene, I think we all remember, at the very early in the play where Walter Lee has gone to work and Travis is off, and you just have these three women talking for almost 45 minutes. And you're like, where else, what other play has three Black women in a room talking? And that was profound for me, in a way of giving that voice and that amount of space to those people and those bodies.
That's such a profound point. And I just as a follow-up, I wanted to ask you, because one of the things that for me writing about Lorraine and her queerness was also the work of reading her work in light of that. Is that even when they're not explicit themes, is that something that has been part of the work for you in terms of both putting on A Raisin in the Sun, but also thinking about the legacy of the play?
Yeah, and particularly with the role of Benitha and her relationship to the men in her life. I mean, this is a person who was holding court with two men, and you know, and also holding her independence in front of all of it. So that being othered in her own family was quite interesting, and we investigated that, you know, and how the reaction of the men to her was very telling also. So yes, I think that queerness is not just her sexuality, but is how we are actually walk through the world and how we are seen by other people, including our family. So that was very significant, yes.
I think I first read her when I was in high school, you know, and it had a profound effect on me because my family had recently immigrated from South Africa, from apartheid South Africa, and I had grown up in a township, you know, completely segregated, and I had obviously read about America's segregated history, but reading that play was traumatic and healing at the same time. you know, because there was the immediacy with which she wrote those characters, the trauma that was palpable in the way that they were coping, was so familiar to me. And watching the terrifying slide that Walter Lee was going through was something that I felt like I'd seen my whole life with my uncles and with the male members of my family. And my father always described that slide as the emasculation of colonialism and its dangers.
Wow.
And so I felt like it was just, I hadn't seen writing that captured that. It was profound. And then when I was in my 20s, I actually auditioned for a production of it in Boston at the Huntington to play Beneatha. And I got a call back, and it was the first time I'd gotten a call back at a major theater like that. And I was like, well, aren't I fancy? And so even though I didn't get cast, it was the green light that I needed to go to grad school. And then I directed it at the Huntington many years later. And something that the artistic director said to me after he saw the first run of it, he said, it's such an angry production. It's so full of rage. And he's like, and you forget that poverty isn't just about noble endurance, it's about raging at your circumstance. And that was very much like how I entered into that play. I entered into its given circumstances. It was very personal. The size of her vision, the intensity of her writing, the poetry, she can handle all of it. You know, it's like every single one of us can come with our particular, you know, personal, emotional interpretations. And the way that, you know, it's a classic, a true classic, is that she's written something that has room for all of our interpretations. And because it's so darn good and clear and strong, even if we have a crappy interpretation, it's still going to be powerful because her writing transcends all of our ideas as well. You know, so that was just, it was a privilege to travel through that play, you know, all those times. I can see why, you know, it's one of those ones you want to keep on working on. It's one of those ones where throughout your career as an artist, as a young person, as a, you know, mid-career, as an elder in the field, you want to touch it.
Something that you said really, I think is so profound about sort of being able to connect to the play from the experience of apartheid South Africa. And one of the questions that I think is always surrounds A Raisin in the Sun is this question of universalism, or some degree of universalism, right? And so Hansberry herself kind of resisted the narrative of universalism vis-a-vis the larger American public, but Hansberry was also an internationalist. Hansberry thought about Blackness globally, internationally. She was, you know, she was a outspoken anti-colonialist. And so I want to ask you, and actually all of you, about this, how you see how would you describe the capaciousness, the breadth, the way so many different people can connect to this play, and yet there's something very particularly Black about it?
I'll just quickly jump in. I think, you know, one of those things, I know we're all taught that, you know, the personal is the universal. And it's certainly true, the more specific and the more personal and the more culturally specific it is, you know, the more resonance it has throughout. But, you know, I think there's something in that, because you can feel her resistance to that notion in the way she writes and talks about this idea. And I think this idea of her great work about Black Americans is able to resonate with white people, because when they say the universal in terms of our work, they mean white people, right? Like that's what that means. They don't mean a South African girl in a colored township. They mean white people. And so I think what she's saying is, it's my work and it's about my people and it's about our story. And great if you like it, but it wasn't written about you or for you.
Mhm.
That's me projecting. I don't know if it's true, but you know, I think that there's like that universal thing is a double-edged sword.
Well, I would just say that everybody knows about struggle.
Mm.
Everybody knows about wanting more than you have, wanting more for your children, right? And I think that speaks to the heart of the play,
Mm.
you know, and a need to be better and do better, even if better means liquor. I want a liquor store, or I want a bigger house, you know, something like that. I mean, so struggle is universal. You know, I think that we're not used to white folks admitting it or acknowledging it. But I think that it's absolutely there.
Well, I was just going to jump in and offer something. And Liesl said that she had auditioned for it at one place at Huntington.
Huntington.
Yeah, and eventually directed it. And it's my second production of Raisin was at the Hartford stage, where I had at one time performed it. I do want to say one thing. One of the productions, I did it 3 times maybe as a director. And we're talking about Universal, and it was very interesting that this artistic director pulled me aside to tell me that he had some issues with what I was doing, because Black people didn't actually talk to each other about these issues in their home. So for me to for me to support and encourage this kind of dialogue between the actors, I mean, with the lines, but also just table talk around the table. He just felt like that was not something that we do in our homes. So,
Wow.
oh, just saying.
Not that he felt that way, but he had the gall to say those
Say
words
it.
to you.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. There were he and I had moments anyway. So I mean, because pretty much he had some idea that was, and I think that's why I'm mentioning it, that was toward the universal of it, whether this was a universal play or whether this was very specific to the Black culture. And I just pointed out that because it was so specific to the Black culture, it was universal, because we all have this same thing happening behind the closed doors of our homes.
Yeah, I think it's an unapologetically Black play. And I think it pisses me off sometimes when we talk about plays that, you know, by Robert or by Lynn or by all of our great writers. And we always reduce it, I think, to a discussion about, you know, the political part or the social part of being Black in America, you know? And what I want to say is that the craftsmanship with the writing of this play, the reason that lasts forever is because it's well written, it's well structured. It's like have characters that are well developed. It's not like you can just look, you can look at the arc of Travis in the play, and he has a full arc, and Benita has a full arc, and Mama has a full arc. It's a great damn play. She was a great writer who understood a beginning, a middle, an end. She understood climax. She understood, you know, all those things. And I started on the play as an actor, and it's probably the play that I probably worked on the most in my life. And the reason that is because it's a great play. If I did a production, I acted in a play for Woody King. And all of us stand on the shoulders of people like Woody King. And so when he's bringing that play to me, he has an idea about the play that's different than my idea about the play. But Lorraine can embrace all of that. And then in 2004, I did a production with an actor who hadn't ever been on stage before, but he understood what it was like to grow up poor in America And Lorraine put those words in his mouth that made those words they flow out naturally. You don't have to change the rhythm of the story. The words are just there. And then 10 years later, I do a production with Denzel Washington, who's an actor who's done everything. And those productions had nothing to do with each other. I never thought about the production 10 years earlier. I was thinking about where are we in America in 2014? Oh, wow. And I had the scenic designer to do one gesture. All he did was move the set 3 feet toward the audience at the beginning of the play. And what that did was it just set the story in their laps. Take it, you know? And also as they walked into the play, the theater, they heard Lorraine's voice. I found in 2014, people had no idea of Lorraine's intellect. You know, the fact that she spent lots of time with Langston Hughes and James Baldwin and all the great scholars. So I wanted people to get a sense of who she was. But I just say all that to say that the woman, she's a great writer. And many times when people speak of great writers, they say, oh, it's Shakespeare. I mean, no disrespect to Shakespeare, but there are many Black writers worldwide, you know, Wallace Arete, August Wilson, who stand on who stand in that same army. You know, we have some great writers, right, Mr. O'Hara? We have some great writers.
Absolutely. You know, and when you were speaking, Kenny, I was thinking about the fact that the 2 times I've seen Raisin on Broadway was your productions, of course, and that you had, as you were said, someone who had never done acting really, and a person who was probably 30 years older than the part. And I think of the announcement of Ian McKellen doing Hamlet. Right. And I think about, you know, the classic idea of Lorraine, you can't break it. You know what I mean? Right. It doesn't matter who's in the part. If you say the words in the order that they've written, you can't break it.
Not to cut you off, but the joy in that is like, I think the fact that this world has space for all of our interpretations of the play and they're all valid, you have to figure out what was the director trying to do and was he or she successful at doing that? So when we did the second time with Denzel, and I found that the show, like I found like Walter Lee has one chance at getting this dream, getting this thing right. And I felt like a lot of 30-year-olds in 2014, they were like, I mess up when I'm 30, I get another shot. So I was trying to make it be like, you got one dream. And a story that I haven't shared with many, I was in LA meeting with Denzel. We're getting ready to do the show. He said, I want to take you somewhere. So we get in his car and we go to this wonderful house with a couple of palm tree-like bushes out front. And a woman comes to the door. She opens the door. She said, oh, he's expecting you. We go inside, me and Denzel, and there's the great Sidney Poitier. And I'm like, oh Lord, I'm in the home with Sidney Poitier on the left, Denzel Washington on the right, men whom I just respect, right? And in that conversation, because we wanted sort of his blessing, you know, about doing the production. And I said, you know, Mr. Poitier, this is after about 2.5 hours there. And I said, Mr. Poitier, some people are like jumping on me about, you know, Denzel's not the right age to play the role. And, you know, I don't know, what do you have to say about that? And he says, and this is a very classy man, he says, there's only one person that I can think of who can do justice to this role right now, who can even come close to what I did. And that's Denzel Washington. And I said, well, what do you say to those people that are telling us, you know, he's not the right age? Mr. Poitier says, fuck him. and with that, I said, we're doing this production. I said, Sidney Poitier has blessed us. And not to take up any more time, but early on in the 2004 production, I went to the great Lloyd Richards' house in Midtown. And I said, Lloyd, I love the struggles that you guys did in 1959. I want you to know that whatever we're doing on Broadway now is just honoring what you guys did. Do you know that Lloyd sat down with me for like, you know, days on end talking about the play and the challenges of it. And then I met with Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis, and I said, you guys, why don't you come by rehearsal? You're welcome anytime. Ruby came by every night of tech and previews and gave me notes, you know. And but I always talk about that because people don't hear those stories, how we stand on the shoulders of all those who came before. So I was connected to Lord Richards and Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis, even though I never saw that production, you know, because so I think that every time we do A Raisin in the Sun, we honor what other directors have done. So I want to thank all of you guys for doing what you do, because it kind of fuels through us, you know what I mean? And the world is big enough to hold all these stories and to hold all our interpretations, but it has to be a great play first. And Lorraine was a great artist.
I love the discussion of her relationship with Lloyd Richards, because I think that's a part that is missing from much of the way the story is told, that dynamic, really deep friendship and mutual trust, right? Between the two of them.
Well, it's like I got pissed off when Lloyd didn't get a chance to do the film. Right. He didn't get a chance to do the 1959 film. So in 2004, I had the opportunity to do the film. And that's one reason I wanted to do the film, because usually as a Black director, you don't get a chance to do the film version of the play that you directed.
Yeah. Related to that point about this point about the history of the relationship between the directors over time, I'm wondering if you all have thoughts about the way Hansberry influenced contemporary playwrights, or that aspect of the tradition. Do you feel or see the impact of her work in the current landscape?
It's funny, I'm always looking for Beneatha in writing, because after you say those lines as a young woman, being given words that actually feel like they stretch you, they challenge you, but they also are you, and it doesn't diminish young womanhood. It inhabits like the full glory of our dreams and our imagination and our intellect. It sort of spoils you, because it's so hard as a young woman, particularly a young Black woman, to find language like that. It's kind of painful, right? Like once you've gotten to say words like that and think, because I always think that to understand Beneatha is to understand Lorraine, right? Like it's like they're the same, and it's a privilege to get to live inside of that character and to just be given the rigor of that girl, and the sophistication of her relationships with the people around her. Just no quarter was spared in the writing. It's just so inspiring. I just feel like I'm always looking for her. I'm always looking for the next, character that has that same ferocity, and sometimes you find it, and sometimes you don't. But it just shows how bold and precious. Because if it still feels that ferocious and it was written in the time it was written, it's hard to find that voice for that woman in screenplays, in television. It's still a rare gem. There's a lot of wonderful writing, that has emotionality, that has, raw truth, but that marriage of intellectual, emotional, and brave, forward thinking writing for a young Black woman is still something so special.
I want to add to that, in that when I've worked on the play, the 3 times I have directed, it was always Benny that I had to talk to in a different, not in a different way, but with just using a different understanding of where she was coming from. And part of it was because the last generation, this generation, or whatever, the young women will step up to their parents and or to authority of some sort. And they don't, they don't recognize that anything about stepping across the line. As a matter of fact, they're wondering why you're telling them they can't step up and take their power and all that. And talking about Benny, it was just that she was already for me in another place. The one in the household who had moved beyond the household in some way and was able to recognize and or live in the world outside of that apartment door, that fueled her for me, that made her recognize that she does have a voice. It's just that you don't use it toward mama, to Lena. And that was a place where she needed to figure out another way to make this happen, especially if she's right there in the household. So when she does say something to her about God, you kind of don't do that. Because it is the belief that has held Lena together for her entire life. So many of the things that she could or could not have done, that her belief in God was what let her get to the next step when she was denied the other step. So I found that by playing Benny so many years ago, I think that's when I understood that Benny was a little out of line in what she did. And I'm not sure, I honestly don't know that I would know that had I not been there. In terms of an example, or what happened was when we got to that part, while we were in rehearsal, every time we got to that part, and this was back before they would bring in a fight coach or choreographer or something. So every time we got to that part, she wouldn't slap me. She just wouldn't do it. And it was very difficult for me to get to the next thing I had to do, because Claudia would not slap me. Then I found out why there had been some issues in the original production with Claudia and in that moment. And I never did get really, when she finally did, it was so, it was just a sort of a little brief moment, just where I just needed to have a little more to work with, slap me, okay, I'm ready for it. And I think one day in rehearsal in tech, she was very upset. Claudia was upset about something else. I don't think it even had anything to do with the play. And we got to that moment, and she sort of, she gave me a nice one. I was so surprised, because I was so used to this sort of little glance or something. I just sort of stood there, and she said, "Is that what you're going to do? Because Diana didn't do that." And then I said, nothing, actually. I just stood there, because it never occurred to me that I was functioning as a 10 years later, 15 years later, Diana, for her in her performance. So I had to figure out some things after that. It was, let's just say that Raisin was a huge learning experience for me as an actor, and just working through it. And that it would seem that I would have known more about it, even, born and raised in Washington, D.C., you would think I would have seen Raisin in the Sun somewhere, Howard University especially, but I never did, and I didn't know much about it. And I had a lot of things that I had to learn through that. And I'm grateful to Miss McNeil for teaching me some of these things, but in the moment, I just didn't know how to respond. It was something that was not expected. But at the same time, it wasn't supposed to be expected, because Benny doesn't know that Mom was going to slap her. But all along in rehearsal, I hadn't been getting slapped. So when it happened, I was, is that what you're going to do? Because Diana didn't do that. Okay. That was when I had to say, am I supposed to do whatever Diana did? But no.
Well, I can speak to the sort of contemporary, how it feels contemporary to me, in that I think it gives it. It certainly gave me, but I think of the work of Lynn Nottage and I think of the work of August Wilson. It gave them license to take up space. I mean, the amount of time that each of these, I think of Ruin, I think of Sweat, and I think of all of August's work, and that there is a license to actually take up as much space as you need. And I think Raisin does that. It's not a one act. It's not quiet and a sort of like a kitchen room drama. There's a lot of stuff that she takes her time with, which is sort of, to me, as a contemporary playwright, gave me license actually to do that.
That's great. Imani, also, you were talking about how does it affect the new generation? Well, I see Lorraine all over. It's like, you got to remember, she was 29 or so when she had the cancer, died at 34. And so I always think about, what if? So when I look around the world, when I see Issa Rae, when I see Ava DuVernay, and oh man, what Ava is doing in Hollywood and all that. And, when I see Kerry Washington, when I think of Lynn Nottage, all of those people to me have a slice of Lorraine Hansberry, whether it's in their fearlessness or their courage or their intellect. And I just think that Ms. Hansberry laid the foundation, that I just see it. I see it all around me, and it's beautiful to see. I know the younger generation get knocked around a lot, but I see a lot of good as well.
I love to hear you all talk about the way you sort of live in the space of the play, like the occupying the space in different ways and having a personal journey inside it. I mean, I think that's it's something that those of us who are not in the world of theater don't often think about, like what it means to live inside. And I guess I wanted to ask a question that's a little bit more delicate, but is about controversy. And so, it's well known that there were other people who were in, Black playwrights, directors who found A Raisin in the Sun objectionable. Or the subsequent, or Sign of Sidney Brewstein's Window, there were debates over representation, over politics, all these sorts of things. And I guess I'm also curious about how you think about that. What are there lessons from that history that are relevant today? Because, there's a way in which she's out there, she's young, she's incredibly vulnerable. She has a huge success. And then she has people who she adores, members of her community, saying, this is not it, right? This is not how we should be depicted. And she struggles with that, right? But then now, all these years later, both she and the people who didn't like her work, we honor and we adore. But I'm just wondering about, is there something we can learn about the politics of representation or debates around what Black theater ought to do and say?
Well, I think people didn't like Jesus Christ. Martin Luther King had Martin Luther King had an approval rating of less than 50. When he passed away. If you don't have people against you, then you're not doing something right. So I like to focus on what is right. What does she do to uplift us and move us, inspire us? There are always going to be some people. There are people that, in working with August Wilson, people would say, oh, August doesn't know how to write women, or whatever their opinion of him. That's just their opinion. He's coming from one specific particular view. Does it serve the purpose? Does it add to the body of work? And I think that America does that more for Black artists and entertainers more than it does for others. They're always pitting Black directors, Black producers against each other, like there can only be one. You know what I mean? When, on the other hand, you can have Tennessee Williams and Eugene O'Neill, and you can have all those cats in the same world, and we don't have to push it. So, and that's one thing. It's like I remember someone was asking me when we were going through a debate about Tyler Perry's films and what people think about Tyler's films or Spike's films. And it's like, there has to be room in our world for all of it. And as Black people, I feel like we can't say, oh, no, there's one pill for all of us. No, there's some things that may not work. There's some things that that won't work for everybody. So for me, I think it's the time we spend to discuss that is almost like when people discuss the greatest player of all time in sports. You know, it's like those are discussions that they didn't play during the same time. So where is it going to end?
I think it is absolutely a result and a legacy of white supremacy, and that we are not allowed on the stages. And so when we are allowed on the stages, we are represented as this is a monolith, and this is the person that's supposed to support that monolith. Whereas if white supremacy had allowed more voices of color on the stage, it would not be a question about whether she's supposed to hold the mantle up to what Blackness is or how we're supposed to be represented. And I would point us to Sidney Poitier's comment to Kenny Leon, fuck them.
But you know, we can see it in contemporary, like there's some, when slave play was up, there's some, you know, some people, oh, well, this, I'm like, there should be room for slave play. Should be room for the non-slave play. There should be room for all of that. And we got to continue to, you know, we got to fight to change the great white way, you know, because it's definitely not broad enough, you know, and which also brings me back to A Raisin in the Sun and the 2014 production. Lorraine is doing a interview with Studs Terkel. So I played that as audiences were walking in. And it was started in the background. And what she said in that interview is that America has to be more than these 6 blocks of theater in New York. You know what I mean? And she was right. She, you know, talking about the need to have regional theater and the need for us not to look in one place for all our storytelling. But she was critical of them even as she was putting the play up in 1959 on Broadway.
At the time, I imagine 1959 when the play was done and there had been no representation on Broadway of any sort that wasn't singing and dancing, that it was imperative in a way to put something up that was warm fuzzy, if we're going to talk about the Black culture. And that was what was accepted. And that was the same thing as I was saying, this man, this white artistic director tells me that we don't talk to each other that way, or we don't have these discussions. They had an idea of what it was that we were going to be doing behind our doors. And that is what should have gone up in 1959. I think also sometimes Black folks buy into that because they're trying to have a certain kind of image presented as they move forward, and that image didn't fit with what they were thinking. If you're gonna have a chance on Broadway, be warm fuzzy in some way, you know. And it didn't work. But in another kind of way, it was really kind of beautiful in that there was so much warmth in fuzziness in the way these people felt about each other and what who this family was and all. And it was just so much love because everybody wanted to support somehow everybody else, but only in the way that they could do it. And you see, if I can get this liquor store, then I can help. I can be a great support to this family, and we can move out of this place where Travis doesn't have his own room. I just need this liquor store, right? And so it's an interesting thing that they were trying. Everybody had a dream, and they also had a set of values that they were trying to reach and acknowledge. And sometimes the values didn't work with each other, and certainly the dreams didn't work with each other. But I never felt, it was just love. I just felt when I would sit there and listen to this family, even when they were in the middle of it, then I would say, yes, that's my uncle so-and-so, that's my, my aunt so-and-so, and their belief in them, their belief in what could be possible. And because it could be possible, it would be possible. And that's what I felt like every time I worked on the show, every time I even saw the show, and just sort of every time I read it, because I do pick it up and read it every 3 or 4 years, just because I need to feel good.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about just on my own personal experience of the women that I've had the opportunity and blessing to work with because of the play. You know, I'm just sitting here thinking like, wow, I forgot I did do the play with the great Esther Rowe. And I remember what Esther Rowe brought to the play. And then, you know, Felicia Rashad playing the same role and won a Tony in 2004, which was the first time a Black woman had won for leading actor in a play, won a Tony Award. I was like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, wait a minute, what happened to all those other beautiful Black women before that? Like, really? And then, you know, or to be in a room with, you know, Audra McDonald and Sophie Okonedo, and it's just so many powerful women. And now when I think about it, I think I always approach those plays like thinking, coming from that male's point of view, like, what is it like to be in the house with 3 women? So I can do that. Every time I'll start out that way, but I'll get in the room and then there's 3 powerful Black smart women that they end up teaching me things about things that I never paid attention to enough. I never listened enough. And because of A Raisin in the Sun and being in all those rooms over years with all those powerful, different women, I think it still influences me today when I'm in a rehearsal hall working on something that's not even remotely close to A Raisin in the Sun. But I think about the wisdom and power that I gained from all those women. So I try to behave as a man in those rooms. And I'm a better listener now. I'm a better storyteller. I remember Kerry Washington, we were working on a show, American Son. And she said, Kenny, it was about a mother whose son had been missing late at night. And she says, Kenny, this is 4 a.m. in the morning, and I'm in the police station with 3 men with guns. And I had never thought to play it because she's like, my husband is here, who's an FBI agent. The guy at the front desk is a police officer, and then there's another police officer, a Black police officer. They all have guns. For a woman to be in that space, trying to tell her truth, trying to stand up, it's different. You know what I mean? And the way she articulated that, it influenced my storytelling. So I always go back to like, that's because of Lorraine Hansberry too. So because of Lorraine Hansberry, I'm doing a Broadway show and a Netflix picture based on something I learned and didn't even know I was learning because of Lorraine Hansberry. So it goes back to what Liesl was saying, 3 women, when have you seen 3 women, different ages, different places in life, and speaking power, you know, so thank you.
I also wanted to go back to what you were saying, Liesl, because one of the things that's interesting to me is like when you read the reviews from 1959, the story is Walter Lee's story, right? And what's really interesting about talking to people in the current context, there's a lot more discussion about the women, and people would even, Lorraine was self-critical. She was like, there wasn't a central character. Although I think that was part of the genius of the play, but she's like, you know, they all have, as you said, Kenny, an arc. They all have motivations. They all have, right? There's not like, it's not just Walter Lee's story. But I actually want to know if you are, and I want to start with you, Liesl, about Ruth, who, because I think, you know, here's the most minor character, maybe except for Travis, and yet in some ways that's also a really important. Hers is an important story in terms of how we think about, I don't know, representations of women and Black women in particular, even in the ways in which she is submerged.
It's funny, Ruth is she's such a powerful character, you know, because she does that thing of challenging him and supporting him simultaneously, you know. She pushes him when he needs to be pushed. One of the things I I love one of my favorite scenes in that play is when they have that rip-roaring fight, and then she goes away, and and then he joins her in the bedroom and they make love. And I always, the tenderness with which she's written, that she's allowed to be sad, she's allowed to be hurt, she's allowed to be a full woman in a full complicated marriage. She doesn't just have to be a steamroller, or a suffering Black wife. I mean, she's so complex, and I love that she's allowed to fight with her husband and then just be so sad, because something that I feel like we're not often allowed to be is vulnerable.
Mm.
The Black woman's story. No, people are not comfortable with our vulnerability. They much rather us be sassy. They much rather us be pushy or strong. And even though we're constantly, indicted for being intimidating, that's what they want to see, us being powerful or us being sassy. And that humanity that she's given in that role is always so moving to me. I feel like I could direct that scene over and over again. I love it so much.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Liesl. I feel like Ruth is very close to me, because I feel like, what were her dreams deferred? Here's a woman who walked into a home with a husband and pregnant, and 10 years later, she's still in that room. She's in somebody else's house, and a man that is living with his mama. And what were her dreams, that were deferred? And can we make space for her to just live inside that moment, right? As opposed to being Superwoman, because we start out with Superwoman, making the food, getting everybody up and out, right? Making sure everyone is taken care of, and she's carrying another child. So is she going to be here another 10 years? There's the sort of, I don't know if it's written in the script, but I think that we've sort of all sort of like gone to she's doing that sort of doing laundry sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I remember at some point I just told the actress, like, why are you doing laundry? Like, what are you doing? Just sit down for a moment, right? And also the idea that there's that little thing, like I call them, what do they call, Easter eggs, right? That Walter Lee gets a cigarette out of her purse, right? And so the idea that Ruth is a smoker, and this is the time before they said smoking was bad for a child, and she's pregnant, and cigarettes are in her purse, right? So it's finding those little Easter eggs in that character, which I find to be so exciting for that character to work on Ruth. I just love her.
In terms of Easter eggs, which I love that term now, and will steal it from you, one of the things I think about in terms of Ruth, as a matter of fact, in so many plays, especially of a certain era, I say to that character, someone like Ruth, what woman have you talked to today? Friend, girlfriend, and just said how you're feeling, or what's going on, or who have you talked to? It's so interesting that in so many plays of a certain era, and the woman like Ruth is really strong and really sort of focused, and there's no mention of having some sort of camaraderie with another woman or a group of women. She's there alone in a lot of ways. And even though Ruth is in the house with two other women, there's nobody that she can sit down and have that other kind of conversation with. And she has it with Walter, but it's a man, woman, husband, wife conversation. I need to have the girlfriend conversation. You have to. That's essential for mental health. And I think about that, and I think about who Ruth talked to.
Are there other plays by Hansberry that you, or work or scripts that you wish were more widely embraced or produced?
All of them. All of them. All of them. We should know them all the way that we know all Tennessee Williams' work. You should know them
Exactly.
all.
Exactly.
All of
I mean,
them.
he had Tennessee Williams has plays on Broadway that lasted a night and a half, that nobody does ever again. All of them. I agree. All of them.
And also I want to see all of them, and I want to see, every age of Black director get to interpret them. You know what I mean? Like we get on Broadway, we see people right out of Yale, directing secondary, whatever, mediocre plays. I want to be able to, she wrote them for us, and I want to see every kind of Black artist interpret them.
And all I wish for something that I can't have, which is I wanted her to have more time, because when I look at LeBlanc, for instance, I don't think she had enough time to finish that, and it might be in my own imagination, but I can see her there, and I can see in some areas where she was not there. And so as artists, I wish maybe I should do it, but I think somebody should spend some time with that particular play and seeing where the things you need to mine a little more. You know what I mean? I think a lot of our plays suffer from that. Like I love James Baldwin, but a lot of our plays historically are sort of, people label them didactic because we're talking about social issues but if the non-Black plays, we spend time on making them relevant for a new generation. And I think as artists, we should spend more and more time making our plays reach this generation, the now generation. So, but she was great.
I have to say, I feel like if we can have, quote unquote, problem for our plays about, a whole mess of Irishmen in a bar, I certainly feel like we can explore LeBlanc in whatever form it's in.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that's sort of amazing also about LeBlanc and almost all of the work, I mean, there's all these different versions of it that have been preserved, right? So there's abundant material in the archives for anyone to go into, and yet it's fairly rare. So one of the things that I love about I love Lorraine and Jimmy's relationship, and I love it for many reasons. One is, she, before being well known, she comes out and defends him in one of the sort of early read-throughs of one of his plays, and is like, pushing back against all of the distinguished white men who were attacking his work. And he says about her with A Raisin in the Sun that she does something really transformative on Broadway. She brings Black people, right, to the Great White Way. And, at various moments in our conversation, y'all mentioned, what it meant for her to write for us. And I just, I guess I want to sort of re-ask that question, right? And think about her, and also what it means just broadly for you to write for us in contexts that are resistant to that, right? I mean, she made space, as you put it, Robert, took up space for Black people. I suppose that's still a struggle. Yes, go ahead, please.
Imani, what I would add to that is that there are people that write, let's say, for us, and then I think there are writers who love us. There are writers who love our culture. Like August Wilson loved our culture. He's like, look, we got kings and queens in our own culture. We have everything in our culture that we need. You know what I mean? It's this systemic racism that sort of squashes that, but we have it. And as Black folks, we have to realize that. So when I look at Lorraine loved us, and you can feel the love in her storytelling. James Baldwin loved us, gave his life. Langston Hughes loved us. And one of the things I think has happened in modern times is we don't spend enough time with each other. After the George Floyd murder, I think that more Black intellectuals and more Black artists have been spending more time together. And that's a beautiful thing where James Baldwin and Langston, they spent time together. And with our success today, sometimes it's like, okay, this person makes $1 million, so they go over here. This person makes $1 million, they go over there. And all the great artists don't get a chance to dance together. You know, you look at old films of Cabin in the Sky and you see Ethel Waters and the Nicholas brothers. And it's like, because of racism then, we all had to do things together. So my wish would be finding a way that people of color as artists and politicians, and I was just spending time with like Harry Belafonte. You can get so many lessons from Harry Belafonte because he's saying we're on two trains running. We're like activism and artistry, those two trains are running. And we need to find a way to run on both those tracks at the same time. And sometimes I think I forget it. I think we forget it. But we should always be running on two trains. So that's what I loved about the relationship between Baldwin and Hansberry, because they were, if it didn't work in a play, it could work in a speech. It didn't work in a speech, it could work in a book. But they were pushing and stimulating each other. So I'm going to try to make more of a commitment myself to find Robert O'Hara and Liesl and Seret Scott and just knock it up against each other, you know, because I think there's beauty in that too. And I think that's a lesson that comes from Lorraine too. That's a lesson over generations that she's telling us, hey, don't forget who you are, where you come from. And you got to mix it up. You got to sit at the dinner table sometime together to just beat it out of each other.
Kenny, that's so profound. And what you're saying about those writers loving Black people. I remember when I first saw Booty Candy. And I just felt like if everybody in the whole world didn't see that play, then there was just no justice. You know, when you know, you see a writer, you know, from your tribe that just you know, just paints the whole canvas. It's so inspiring. You literally just want everybody to see it, because you know that it changed you and it will change them. And I think, you know, that's one of the things about Lorraine and their relationship was that they felt each other's love for us, and they connected to it. And that's why they were champions for each other, because they understood how precious it was.
Yeah, unapologetically.
Yeah. When you see that unapologetic Blackness, like what Robert does, you know, you understand how unique and precious it is, and how, so, you know, not everybody has that boldness, and you just want to champion it.
You know, Kenny, to respond to something you were saying about not seeing each other and not, you know, spending time together anymore. One of the things I talk to students about is the fact that back in the day, you know, if you had an audition, first of all, your agent would actually use something called a telephone and call you and say, you have an audition, and that you had to pick up your sides tomorrow between 12 and 1:30. You can't go, because they were not downloaded or anything. You had to go physically pick them up. But everybody who was going to be auditioning for that would also be there between 12 and 1:30. So what would you do? You would see all the people that you knew, and then you'd pick up your sides and you go to Chock full of Nets, which was, you know, down the block, and you sit there for about 45 minutes to an hour, and you'd find out everything. You had a community, is all I'm saying. You had a community, and that community supported each other in another kind of way. Yeah, tomorrow we're all going to audition against each other, but today we're going to eat the raisin bread and cream cheese sandwich at Chock full of Nuts, and we're going to talk about who needs what, and whose, you know, sister or brother or mother or father has had a problem or whatever, because we know each other. And I think that that's what has happened, that we have allowed technology. Hello, technology. We've allowed that to changed the way we interact. So yeah, right now we have to do this because of the pandemic. But I would like to think that we would have been in a restaurant somewhere with a microphone on the table and everybody was sitting around having this conversation, and then you would all piece it together anyway in another life and time. Do you know, I just wish that we still wanted some of the tradition of communicating that happened so many years ago. And because that tradition was what allowed us to know and or feel safe in our environment and in our careers and in our lives, because somebody else knew what was going on.
It makes me think of being in Lorraine Hansberry's papers and seeing that she took these copious notes when she took a class from W.E.B. Du Bois about Africa, and then being able, the history of the African continent, and then being able to see how that, all of that showed up in LeBlanc, right? That, and the preservation of the notes, right? And it's just exactly this point about relationships and being in community with one another. And given that we're trying to sort of sustain Hansberry's legacy and sustain community with her, I don't know, maybe we can end, if you all each have thoughts about how we can honor her now in the way that we operate in our respective callings.
I would say it's almost like when the great August Wilson passed away, and I couldn't accept the fact that he would no longer be around. And I said, we have to start something for young people that will forever put August Wilson out in the world. So at that time, we started something called an August Wilson monologue competition with ninth graders. And they competed using any monologue from any of the 10 plays. And I didn't have any money at the time. We started it in one school, and now we're in 15 states with kids from 9th to 12th grade. And then they come to New York pre-COVID and compete on a Broadway stage using one of those monologues. Now, but that was because I knew that if we did not do something, America would soon forget you. Even though he was a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winning writer, had many plays on Broadway, won Emmy Awards, I knew that if we didn't, as a culture, put it into our hearts, soon people would say, August who? It's just like some people said, Lloyd Richards, who is that? And so I think it's incumbent upon us to come up with things that would have people never to forget who Lorraine Hansberry was and what her contributions were to America. So to me, we have to put not just the one play, but all of her plays into the schools, into the hands of young people, and encourage them to pass that on, because that's what's going to keep it alive. And the idea that we're going to create or support a statue, a memorial, an image of a woman, a powerful artistic woman, to have something that someone can look at, a little girl, a little boy can look at and says, wow, that woman did this in 1959. And because of that, I am here. And because of that, I am encouraged. So I think memorial, or traveling memorial, all the things that we're talking about with the Lorraine Hansberry Initiative, I think it makes perfect sense, as that's the way it's going to keep us alive. And if we don't put something that people can look at, or a text that they can read and do over and over, then we will fail. But I think we have the power within us to make this a reality.
I would just add that I think that what we can do for her legacy is to have a level of grace for each other as artists and as people. I think of Lena's line about, have you thought or cried or prayed for that man in there, for your brother? Have you thought about your brother yet? You know, right. After her putting all of his, laundry in the air. So I would ask that we as artists, but also as a people, that we have a level of grace for each other. That, to me, would live out her legacy.
I like that.
That's so beautiful, Robert.
Mhm.
I would wish that, and hopefully with, there's a way through this initiative. I just think about, as a young woman who felt like I read too much, or I was reading things that my peers were not reading, and felt like I had to kind of dumb myself down a little bit to find my place in high school, that there's a way for them to be comforted as I was, and to know that it might not be now, but I will find my place, through reading Hansberry and through reading Beneath. I think you're right, Kenny, it's making sure she is in the hands of youth, all youth, because she just opens up your imagination so much, and your compassion. And I think we never stop meeting artists who inflame compassion.
It's something that you said earlier, I think, Robert, somebody said this, but I think what Lorraine sort of represents, she doesn't represent either or, she Black, woman, gay, intellectual. So she tells us the magnitude of our passion or our compassion has to be greater. It has to be, we have to start looking at it and start putting fellow humans in little boxes, because these little boxes, not like the Zoom world, but these little boxes will not contain us. They will not contain true humanity. And I think we can learn from Lorraine over and over about how to respect all difference, whatever it may be. It should just be one justice, one humanity. And I think that, what's the word, intersectionality, that's what it is. She's all of that. We got to stop chopping each other up and putting us over in boxes and discarding us. We got to be open to all of us.
I'd like to add that, 34 is younger than anything I can even think of. So to step off of this earth at 34 years old, and how many years later, we're talking about this woman because of what she did in that totally limited period of time. I think it's such a great example of what can be done in that, especially the young people today. They graduate from school and they must have a sitcom in 6 weeks after graduation. It doesn't have anything to do with what it is to build and or find or structure your life in such a way that you keep moving, that you keep doing. Lorraine, 34 is very, very, very young. And that is when she passed. So how much was going on as she was just sick and leading up to that, So we need to recognize that we have a lot of time. We're sitting here on this call here. We've had a lot of time, well, maybe not as much as I've had, but a lot of time. And that time has been spent just trying to get from moving forward, from taking one step and then another step and another step. This woman did an extraordinary amount of everything. I'm not just talking about playwriting. I'm talking about social activism. I'm just talking about understanding communities, understanding the world, stepping up and saying things that needed to be said. She did all of that in 34 years.
And on that note, I'm just thrilled. It's such a soul nourishing conversation. I feel like I learned so much. It's an honor to talk to all of you. For me.
Thank you. It was a privilege to be in this company.
Yeah, you too. Everybody. Good luck to everybody. Take care.
Yes.
Be good.
Thank you.
Love.
Good to
See you
you
soon.
all.
You too.
Be good.
Bye.